Okay, so for your first quiz, we're going to have it on Thursday. It will cover prehistory and Pacific culture. So what should you know, right? What should you know? You should know that you want to focus on vocabulary, right? So the vocabulary that we talked about, the function of each word, the content, so what you visually see, right? That's that visual evidence. The context, that's the history part. And the form is normally how it's arranged, right? As well as how it was made, right? So you want to make sure that you know all of that, okay? And keep in mind that you have to often in our history, as well as a lot of the other history classes through AP, you want to make sure that you can support your conclusions with evidence, okay? I have identification at the top there too. So when you're thinking about identification, remember that you need to memorize how many things? At least how many? 3, right? Try to memorize 3 things, right? You have to give 2, but it's always good to memorize 3 in case you forget one, right? I think the time dates are the hardest to try to memorize the other stuff, okay? So the format of the quiz, it's not obviously AP length, right? It's worth 20 points. All quizzes are worth 20 points. And you're going to have one 15-minute essay worth 5 points. We've practiced those twice in class, so you can always go back and review your notes on those, right? There's going to be a compare and contrast with multiple choice points. So basically, you're going to see 2 images, and you're going to be asked 6 questions based on those, comparing how they're similar and contrasting how they're different, okay? And then, of course, some specific information about those, probably related to the content, the context, the function, and the form. And then you'll have some general multiple choice questions so that it totals 20. Okay, and I try to do a really good balance of the units. So normally there's the same amount of questions for Pacific as there is prehistory. Okay. When taking the quiz, we are going to take it on Canvas, right? We're going to take it on Canvas, and you may not use your notes. Your notes are there for study, but we do not use notes. The only thing we're going to use is our own grades. Since we're using Canvas, it's really important that you have no tabs open on your computer that are anyhow related to art history. I have Hakara, and I monitor what you're doing, okay? So it's really important. Obviously, I'll be walking around the room as well. You'll have 40 minutes to take the entire quiz. That is plenty of time to do it. You really, theoretically, should get 15 minutes plus 30 seconds per question. That's what AP gives you, but I give you more time, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind. You'll have plenty of time to be able to finish it in 40 minutes. So this quiz is on Thursday. Any questions on anything? Okay, what I would suggest that you do is start studying up your note takers. Okay, study up your note takers today, right? Do some more tomorrow. Try to do it before bedtime. We dream about things. You guys know that? It's a great way to learn. You dream about it, so read it and look at it. Do a little bit at a time rather than cram, and you'll retain that information better, right? We will not always take the test on Canvas. I just want us to practice that in case for some reason we have to go remote and have to take them that way in the future. I just want us to be able to know that procedure, okay? But we will do paper tests too, because on the AP exam, you have to write out those 2 hours of essays. So we have to practice with handwriting so that I can read it and other readers can read it. And you also probably aren't used to writing so much anymore. So we have to actually practice that, okay? So if you have questions, come tomorrow. We can take time tomorrow to answer your questions on the quiz. Okay, so we're going to jump into the next unit. So we're in unit 2 on ancient Mediterranean. And so we're going to go to Sumer today, and we're going to focus on power and devotion images. Okay, so the theme for Mesopotamia is Sambam with a P. Okay, the S stands for where we start first, the Sumerians. Right, so if you want to jot these notes down on something else, feel free. There's no place in the note takers for that. Okay, the A stands for Akkadian. The N stands for, does anyone know? Neo-Sumerians. The Sumerians made a comeback. The B stands for, you guys know this one, everyone knows, not everyone, but most people know this one. The Babylonians. The other A is the Assyrians. And then the other N is the Neo-Babylonians. Okay, so a lot of times people are like, I can't figure out what is what about Akkadian Assyrian. So Akkadian, notice that the K is earlier in the alphabet than the S, so that helps you remember, because these are all in chronological order. The Sambam and the P, which is the Persians. Okay, so this is all dominant cultures in chronological order. It doesn't mean that they don't exist at the same time. These are all different city-states that were established, but these are the ones that reigned supreme during different periods of time. Okay, and these were also dominated by powerful rulers. Now we're going to go ahead and watch for the next unit. We're going to go ahead and watch something fun. So if you're at home, you can click on this link on the presentation. I don't know if it's copyrighted, so I'm going to go ahead and pause it if I can get it to kind of show up. See, it's a Monday. There we go. So like the video suggested, okay, we're talking about the region that's known as the Fertile Crescent, right? So we have our 2 rivers, right, that really did fertilize and make this a very hospitable place to live. The only issues we have with those 2 rivers is that they did a lot of mud brick construction. And so a lot of the buildings deteriorated because of flooding. They did not quite have the system that the Egyptians had for using the Nile, which we'll see later. Okay, so we're going to start first with the Sumerians. We're not going to worry about this because I didn't grab out the textbooks for us to look it up. But does anyone know any of the early achievements and innovations of the Sumerians? Does anyone know some of the things that they were able to do before anyone else on the planet? Right? So things happened first in this region rather than in Europe. We have advances in construction, so mud, brick, stone, and timber. Our first permanent villages happened in this region during the Neolithic period, right? They had jobs, right? So they, were able to metalsmith, pottery, weaving, farming, domesticating animals. The Sumerians invented the wheel. They invented the plow, and they finally invented writing. So we're no longer in prehistory. We actually know things because they developed writing first, before the Egyptians, not by very much. Right, so their form of writing, their form of writing is what we call cuneiform, right? Cuneiform. And so what they did is they had a long stick that they called a stylus, and it kind of had like a golf tee on the end of it. And they would press it into wet clay. What is up with this? Sorry. So the first, they had pictographs, I should say. So they drew images. Egyptians have pictographs, correct? Right? So they have images to represent words. Then early cuneiform was basically an abstraction of that. So you can see how this is a bull's head, but this still sort of looks like a bull, right? So it still has pictograph sort of qualities to it, but using that T to kind of press in. And the later ones were much more abstract. Now, why is that important? We know ruler names. We know laws like Hammurabi's law code, right? Because it was pressed into the stone or carved into the stone using cuneiform as text. We know about rulers. We know about trade. We know about them from their writing. Okay, so our first structure is number 12. It's the White Temple and its ziggurat. We are in Uruk, which is in modern day Iraq. And it's a Sumerian culture dating around 3,500 to 3,000. And it was made out of mud brick. So if you notice from this image that we have in the 250, notice that there is no longer a temple. Okay, see that? This would have been placed on the very top. So this part right here would have been placed at the very top. It's now gone. Okay, it was made out of mud brick. It was probably destroyed by the weather. It was probably also destroyed by people. Okay, the only thing that's still around really is that ziggurat. So the ziggurat is this platform, and you can see what all the wind and erosion has done to it. Okay, so Sumerian political and power structures. Does anyone know what it was like during this time? Anyone know what it was like? Who was the leader? Anyone know who the leader would be? Would they have a group of elected officials who run everything? Okay, so let's just ask some honey. So they had not only a supreme ruler, but they had a supreme god. So the Sumerians had a series of city-states. So city-states are basically like little regions that are governed by a certain person or a certain god. And so there were usually supreme gods for each of these places as well. All good and bad comes from those gods. So basically, if the people weren't supporting the god, they might bring drought or flood or famine, right? The city god would talk to all the other gods on behalf of the people, right? So your city god would talk to all the other gods. They believed in, different gods. Okay, the human ruler was the intermediary for the people. So the human ruler worked on behalf of the people, and they basically, communicated to the gods, right? So the human ruler spoke to the gods for the people. And the government was run through the temple. So religion and government was the same. And we call that a theocracy. We call that a theocracy. Okay, it's on my screen. I'm going to get rid of Apple TV and see if that helps here. Much better. Okay. So the temple was in the center typically of the town or the center of the city state. And so it really was power and religion in the heart of the community, right? And these places were also typically elevated to show their power and their prestige, right? So they were placed somewhere strategically so that everyone could see it. So if I'm standing in Sumer, right, or Uruk, I should say, and I look in the horizon, it should stand above, should be like something that is really noticeable. You think about like churches, they have spires, right? Same thing. People should notice it from a distance. I was so hoping that that would work. Oh, there it goes. So, function. The White Temple is dedicated to a god. Does anyone know what god it's dedicated to? Anyone get that in their notes? I know we had a Labor Day weekend, so I'm okay with just kind of going over this. However, I don't want to always do it, right? To make sure we're in the future when we don't have a weekend or a holiday weekend, right? So this temple is dedicated to Anu. Anu is the sky god. Anu is the sky god. And so this temple, right, this white temple at the very top was on top of that ziggurat, which we'll spell in just a little bit, so that it was elevated high up. And these ziggurats are symbolic of a natural phenomenon, right? Somehow maybe related to the sky. What might that be a symbolic version of? You guys know? What's a ziggurat? Anyone take Latin? Any Latin people in here? Right? Where do the gods live in the ancient Greeks? They live in the sky, and they often live in the mountains, right? They often live in the mountains. And so a ziggurat is a symbolic representation of the mountains, right? The place of the gods. It also connects, right? Mountains connect the sky with the earth. Now this city was pretty flat. And so they raised up the temple, and then they fortified the outer walls of the city to protect it from invaders. And invaders weren't necessarily coming from distant lands. They could be your neighbors, right? So here we have that hilltop that I was mentioning, right? This is the place of the gods. This is kind of the lands up here. This is basically where the White Temple sat in Uruk. And so you can see that it's not very, like, comparatively, it's not very big, but this would be other governmental buildings, other temples, but also places where people might live. Right, and so it's kind of in a central location if you think about the whole. Right, so here's some other aerial views. I think this is from Khan Academy or Smart History. Right, and so you guys have an illustration in the book as another image, but I found this one too. I think this might also be from Smart History. And so we know that this is a temple, right? But how would it be used, right? So from this view, is there anything here that's like a part of a structure that people who would be coming to worship Anu might use? Go ahead and talk amongst yourself. What places do you think you would visit or go to if you were going to this structure? Talk amongst yourselves. Okay, how would you get to the temple? Ben, how would you get to the temple? Up the stairs, right? Up the stairs. So you'd be on the level plane, you go up the stairs, and then the stairs, there's another small set here, but do you think you would get to use that small set there? No, you'd be stuck going to the ramp that goes here to here. And where does that lead? Does that lead directly to the temple? No. What are big open areas used for? Yeah. Ceremony. How many people could fit in that spot? Right, those are for large communal gatherings, right? So this is like a courtyard or an atrium, some sort of big open spot for people to gather, right? And then you would get into the temple. Now, this ziggurat and its temple is pretty simple, but a lot of them have a set of stairs that kind of goes around the entire ziggurat. And why would they do that rather than being direct, right? Stairs, a pathway can be representational of a journey, right? And it's a hard journey, right? It's not easy to climb a mountain. So it's a way of kind of showing your dedication to your faith. But you can also have ceremony. Can't you have processionals up those stairs? Rulers could go up those most direct stairs. The god, if it comes to Uruk, could go up the ceremonial staircase, right? So those stairs, the direct routes are normally reserved for the human rulers, gods, high officials, and the people have to work for it, okay? So this illustration gives us a little idea of how you would enter it. This style of temple is what we call bent access. Most of what we see are axial styles. So when we look at an Egyptian temple, you basically start on one end and walk through it. Churches work this way. You take one path down the center and you walk to the altar, right? Other structures that we're going to see, like Buddhist or Hindu temple, you might have to walk around and circumambulate. But for the ancient Mesopotamians, they basically went straight, then turned 90-degree angles, then went straight, and then turned 90-degree angles before they actually got into the temple. I'm almost missing an arrow here, right? So you guys can see goes boom, 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 and then can you see entrance here or entrance here? So you walk through it in angles. There is a series of 3 entrances rather than 1. So important vocabulary, bent access, that'd be part of your formal knowledge. Right? So we have our ceremonial staircase. You can see what they look like today. Okay, so we have a recreation of the White Temple. We don't, we're kind of like educated guesses about what it looked like. So on the outside of it, it would have been white, right? Hence its name. And when you look at it, you can see that it really is just kind of like post and lintel architecture. And it has these doorways, and it doesn't necessarily have traditional windows, right? Why doesn't it have big windows? Why might it have these little skinny things? Is it cold or hot in this region? It's a little warm, right? So if you keep it dark on the inside, it's going to retain the coolness of the morning and the evening, right, of night. And so it's cooler, but also think about what it's like. You're standing on this fake mountain. You're in this open courtyard. You walk into the structure and this is what you encounter. Look at the bottom right, right? How does the environment change from the outside to the inside? How's it different? Catherine? It's a lot darker. So there's an intentional change in mood, right? There's an intentional change in mood. It's bright, you're on the top of the world, and then you walk in, and I can almost imagine it's like outside I can hear chants or song or something. I walk through the door, and then I just imagine quiet, right? Quiet and calm. And so the inside of this has chambers, and you can see those chambers there. There's no real big like ceremonial room. There's not a lot of space for people to congregate. There's like these small, almost like little chapels. And inside those chapels, more than likely, there would have been a God image to Anu. We don't have it, right? We don't have it. There probably would have been other things as well, which we'll talk about. This is the head of a goddess. This is actually Nana from another temple. And we think that, these God images had similar sort of features to them. What tends to be emphasized in it? Where does your eye go when you look at this sculpture? Talk amongst yourselves. Where does your eye go? Okay, I heard it, right? You notice the eyes, right? You notice the eyes. It probably had jewels or semi-precious jewels in there. So it was kind of like come alive. It also had these eyebrows to kind of direct your attention. Our textbook's kind of old. This was one of those pieces that was stolen during the Iraq War. Okay, so the next things that we have are not from Uruk. This is actually from another temple. So this is another temple. But more than likely, things like this would have been found at the White Temple too. So besides images of gods, we would have images like this also in temples, right? So these are votive figures from the square temple at Eshnunna, which is in what we call Tell Asmar today. Okay. Did you guys get a chance to watch the video on this one? How many people got to watch the video on this one? Okay, that's okay. We had a weekend, like I said. Why don't we do this? We're going to watch this video, and I would like you to take notes while you watch. Try to fill in your note takers. Okay, try to fill in your note takers as we watch it. So what are you going to put in these sections on the note takers? This is number 14.
Almost 5,000 years ago, something very small alabaster figures in the floor of a temple.
And we're looking at one of those figures now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It calls this a standing male worshiper. He was buried along with 11 other figures for a total of 12, most of them male.
And we're looking at one of the smaller figures. They range from just under a foot to almost 3 feet.
The temple where these were buried was in a city called Eshnunna, in the northern part of ancient Mesopotamia.
What is now called Tell Asmar. The figures of Tell Asmar are widely considered to be a great expression of early dynastic Sumerian art. We think that the temple was dedicated to the god Abu.
At this time, the 3rd millennium BCE, this area around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, some of the earliest cities in the world emerged. And writing emerged. This is a watershed in human history. The city has had administrative buildings, temples, palaces, many of which have been unearthed by archaeologists.
This is the transitional period right after the Bronze Age, the tail end of the Neolithic, when civilizations are founded in the great river valleys around the world. And he's adorable.
He is adorable. His wide eyes and his sense of attentiveness are very appealing, I think. But of course, he wasn't meant to be looking at us. He was meant to be attentive to a statue, a sculpture of a god who was believed to be embodied in the sculpture.
In fact, we believe that the person for whom this was a kind of stand-in was also embodied in this figurine.
So an elite member of ancient Sumerian culture paid to have this sculpture made and placed before the god to be a kind of stand in to perhaps continually offer prayers, to be continually attentive to the God.
His hands are clasped together. He stands erect. His shoulders are withdrawn, so there's a sense of frontality.
Even though he's carved on both sides, he was meant to be seen from the front, although that term meant to be seen as a funny one.
Well, he was meant to be seen by a god.
Right.
You can see that the hair is parted at the center of the scalp and comes down in wavelets or perhaps braids that spiral down and then frame the central beard, which is quite formal and cascades down in a series of regular waves. His hands are clasped just below the beard. His shoulders are really broad, his upper arms very broad, and then there's very fine incising at the bottom of his skirt.
But it's odd to me how cylindrical the bottom part of his body is and how flattened out the torso is.
If you look at the face carefully, you can see that the very large eyes are in fact inlaid shell, and in the center the pupils are flat limestone. And you can also see that there's incising of the eyebrows that might have originally been inlaid as well.
This is really different from Egyptian culture, which emerges at the same time. In Egyptian culture, the sculptures primarily represent the pharaoh, the king, and indicate his divinity. But in the ancient Near East, instead, we have these votive images of worshippers, but not so much of the kings, at least during this early dynastic period. The figures at Tell Asmar that were unearthed are very similar. They're not meant to be portraits of a specific person, but a symbol of that person.
But he does look very humble. His mouth is closed, his lips are sealed together, and of course he is wonderfully attentive.
And the fact that his hands were clasped, I think, makes him seem more humble as well.
There are some interesting subtle choices that whoever carved this made. Look at the way that the skirt extends out and attaches itself to the forearms a bit wider than we would expect.
Mm-hmm. And the torso, it's just almost V-shape. There is a sense of geometric patterning here and not the naturalistic forms of the body.
If you look at the back of the figure, you can see that there's a little cleft that's been carved in horizontally. And there's also, it seems to be an indication perhaps of a tied belt that hangs down.
You understand, I think, the artist's decision not to make a naturalistic figure, because a naturalistic figure before the god might give a sense of someone just visiting, just passing through. But this idea of a stacked, symmetrical, frontal, wide-eyed figure gives a sense of timelessness, of a figure that is forever offering prayers to the god.
Okay, we'll end with that today, and tomorrow we'll pick up with seeing what you wrote down in your notes